Welcome to the Feds, insiders bringing accountability, integrity, and reform to a broken bureaucracy. At Feds for Freedom, we value constructive dissent and healthy debate. The views and opinions shared in today's episode are those of the speaker alone and do not express the views or opinions of the U.S. government or any other employer.
Welcome back to this week's episode of The Feds. I am Stephanie Weidel. Thank you all who listen to The Feds Weekly. Your comments and encouragements are truly appreciated. We had a wonderful conference at Liberty University in early April. Feds for Freedom was co-sponsoring with the Virginia Medical Freedom Alliance and Liberty University College Republicans. It was the first time the medical, military, and federal government freedom fighters met to discuss and promote medical and constitutional freedoms. It was definitely an exciting moment. We do plan to bring this setup to another college in the fall. And if you would be able to donate towards our mission of speaking out and preventing government overreach and bringing it all to the next generation of doctors, federal employees, military service members, and parents, please hop onto our new and refreshed website and donate towards our cause at fedsforfreedom.org. Did you know that currently several military service members are being actively separated from the military over their declination of the flu shot? Joining me today is R. Davis Younts, one of the lawyers involved. Davis is a retired lieutenant colonel who served as an officer in the Air Force JAG Corps and now works as a constitutional attorney. Davis, thanks so much for speaking with me today.
Oh, it's an honor.
Well, you wear many hats. You are best known, though, for your representation of the service members demanding their constitutional rights be acknowledged by the military. Would you tell us how you came to enter this role?
Yeah, it really goes back to law school. When I was in law school in Pennsylvania, 9/11 happened. And so as a law student, I felt like it was my time to serve in the military. So I did that. I signed up, came straight from law school into the United States Air Force. I served on active duty for 11 years as a JAG. I deployed. And then I sort of reached a time in my life where I was concerned about the direction certain things were heading as far as active duty goes. And I also wanted to focus on my family. So I moved home to Pennsylvania. I did continue to serve in the National Guard and then ultimately in the reserves. And then I was serving successfully as a lieutenant colonel. I was an instructor at the Air Force JAG school. And then COVID hit. And so I was in a battle for my own career. I was denied. My religious accommodation request was denied. My appeal was denied. I received notice of my denial, believe it or not, on the 3rd of July of 2022, going into the 4th of July holiday weekend. There's so much irony in all of this, right? I received it then. I had 5 days to comply. I did not. So I was in violation of what I was told was a lawful order. And I was not eligible to apply for retirement. So even though I had 19 and a half years of service in the United States military, I was outside of a 120-day window in order to be able to apply for retirement. And so I sat down with my wife and my daughters. We prayed. We made the decision we weren't going to comply with something we believed was immoral and unlawful. And so this was a very, very personal fight to me. It took an injunction in federal court in the Doster case in Ohio to prevent me from being separated. That decision, that injunction came down on a Wednesday night. I was told to expect to be removed from the active reserves the next day, that Thursday or Friday. So that injunction saved me between 24 and 48 hours after 19 and a half years of service. So when we talk about this fight, it's something that is very, very personal to me, not just because of my own service or the hundreds of military members I've represented over the years, but it was very personal to me and to my family.
Mm. We have not healed the situation. There are currently service members who are about to be kicked out due to their refusal to take the flu shot. Now, we all know, and we're going to be getting to that the flu shot doesn't actually prevent you from getting the flu. So, before COVID, flu shots were handed out, flu shot exemptions were handed out like candy. What has happened?
So one of the things that was deeply troubling to me, and at times going into the mandate, I was a little bit naive because as a JAG, I'd processed many religious accommodation requests for all kinds of things throughout my time in the service. And the DoD instructions on this, as well as federal law under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, is very clear. You can only deny a religious accommodation request, even in the military, if you can demonstrate a clear, compelling governmental interest, and if the government, meaning the military, proves there's no reasonable alternative means available. There's no alternative. Therefore, we cannot grant this religious accommodation. So religious accommodations, the default prior to COVID was we're going to grant them all if we possibly can. That's the default. So during COVID, that was broken, right? So for a whole lot of reasons that we can get into, everyone was in denial mode and it was going to be 100% compliance no matter what laws were broken to do it. That was the mentality of the Biden administration when it came to the COVID mandate. And so now the flu shots are a casualty of that. And here's the reality with the flu shot. Throughout my military career, many people had multiple kinds of medical exemptions to the flu vaccine. It was never considered a big deal at all, ever. People deployed, people served in every capacity you could think of in the military without getting the flu shot. And there was always a rule in place that commanders' their goal, not a requirement, but a goal was about 90% of their personnel would receive the flu shot. So if it's a 90% goal and you have 2 or 3% that are filing some sort of medical or religious accommodation, it's easy to make that work. Since COVID, that's changed. The clients I'm working with and what I'm seeing is now the default position for anything related to medical treatment or to a vaccine is deny all religious accommodations.
And how many service members are you representing?
So I'm currently representing 10 that are facing either in the final stages or facing administrative separation over not receiving a flu vaccine after they've filed medical exemptions, after they've filed religious accommodations, after they've objected to the lawfulness of the order to receive the vaccine based on military necessity, which we could talk about. But I'm personally representing 10, and I am aware of multiple others that are in some stage of the process of being kicked out over the flu vaccine and denial of legitimate, sincere religious or medical exemption requests. And we're talking about a range of people. I mean, 2 of my clients are very senior individuals. One is a 17 and a half year pilot, and there's a pilot shortage in the Air Force. So there's a lot of concerns that I have with the way that is being carried out. Particularly, we're talking about the flu vaccine. There was a study that was released earlier this week that showed negative efficacy, meaning for a healthy population, you are more likely to get the last flu season in the United States if you took the flu shot than if you didn't.
That's right. That was a Cleveland Clinic study saying you're 27% more likely to get the flu after taking the flu shot. Now, this is not the only study that has come out like this. There was a study done in early COVID that came out, and I, to this day, cannot find it. I have looking at military members who took the flu shot, that they were 30-some% more likely to get COVID if they had taken the flu shot. This is not a new thing. Do you know how many years they have known that the flu shot is actually negatively affecting the population?
I don't know for sure, but I would imagine that there's data that would, for decades, that has probably made that clear.
Let me ask, some of the people that you are representing, have they put in for flu exemptions before, and have they been granted them?
So I have one client who had a long-term medical exemption to the flu vaccine, then it was denied, and then filed a religious accommodation to the flu vaccine as well, which was new. I mean, it was additional research based on things about the flu vaccine and vaccines in general that they learned that caused them to have moral and ethical concerns. And that was an individual that was kicked out. And now we're going through the process. He hired me after the fact. We're going through the process of trying to get his discharge overturned and get him reinstated. But yes, he had valid exemptions to the flu vaccine prior to COVID. And then ultimately that changed during COVID.
Very interesting. So wait, he was kicked out regarding the COVID shot, but he was kicked out
No,
for the
he
flu
was
shot
kicked out for the flu shot
before COVID,
during COVID, essentially.
during COVID.
Yes,
What?
yes, yes, yes.
uh, So is this one particular branch of the military or is this across the board?
This is across the board. This is across the board. There are times when there are leaders in what I would call sort of the healthcare complex within the military that are worse than others. So there's a lot of that going on. One of the things you deal with just culturally with the services is the efficiency of administrative processes. So most of my clients right now that are on the verge of getting kicked out are actually Air Force, because the Air Force is more efficient at administrative processes often than the other branches. And so, they're sort of the leading edge on this and in a very unfortunate way.
So what does this mean for the future of vaccine exemptions? We saw them denied, or not even acknowledged with COVID. We're seeing them denied with flu. Where do you think this is going to go?
Without a significant change in recognition of just the importance of medical freedom, religious freedom, we're heading towards a very, very significant problem when it comes to military service. And what you're going to see, although the numbers have been better since the last election, you're going to see a long-term, significant portion of healthy, young Americans who are unwilling to serve in the military if there is no possibility of medical or religious accommodations to vaccines that you know, for the vast majority of their career would be entirely unnecessary.
Beyond granting exemptions, which by law, there is an exemption process, correct?
Correct.
So, besides granting exemptions, which is in the law, what else can be done to make sure this never happens again?
Well, that's the question. I was at the Pentagon last week. I told you in our kind of our pre-interview, I met with the senior Department of Defense official, and that was part of the conversation. Just long term, what do we do? How do we fix this? And I just looked him straight in the face and said, you follow the law. You follow the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. You follow the DoD instructions related to medical and exemptions and medical accommodations, and the process works. The process worked for about 18 years of my military career, um, for the most part, almost without exception, until COVID occurred. And now it's just, look, there was a problem with anthrax, and that's kind of a history behind this. There was a significant problem with anthrax as well. So this isn't the first time the military has dealt with this, but it really did work for most of my career. And then COVID broke it for many reasons. And the issue is now the Department of Defense, and they've said this in federal court, their attorneys in federal court told the Fifth Circuit they didn't believe they needed to comply with the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, that it wasn't instructive to them, that it wasn't a proactive thing they had to do. It simply gave military members a right to sue in federal court if they felt their rights were violated under it, which is insane. I've never heard an attorney in a courtroom say that's a law we don't have to follow. That just means if we break it and someone has the means, the ability, the time to hire an attorney and go into federal court, then we have to comply. But we only have to comply if a judge tells us to. It was amazing, that level of arrogance that went on in some of these cases.
Absolutely. It's amazing we've gotten to the point that it's a novel idea that the military, really the government as a whole, should follow the law.
Right. Right. And that's all we've been asking them to do, right? That's all we ever asked them to do during COVID is, hey, why don't we just follow the law?
When asked how this is happening under this current administration, the answer seems to be, okay, well, the specific military higher ups are the problem, not the administration, not the Secretary of Defense. And we're going to get to this a little bit later on as well. But what is your take on that?
So I have grave concerns with everything I'm seeing, that there is a significant problem with what I would call malicious compliance. In other words, there are people who are attempting to carry out the orders, but they're doing it in a way to intentionally undermine the intent, right? To embarrass people they disagree with. So there's certainly been a lot of chatter. There's a lot of chatter in military channels, among military JAG channels, of finding ways to slow roll and to push back and not properly implement these orders and the intent of the commander in chief and senior Department of Defense officials. So that's one piece of it. But the other piece of it is a sad but true practical aspect that we deal with when we deal with the federal government, and this includes the military. You have about 32,000 people that work at the Pentagon. Just comprehend that. Essentially, one large office building is bigger than most cities in our country. And so, even to meet with the senior defense official about a critical issue, you're going through layers and layers of bureaucracy. And most of those people have been there for years. And they either only care about power, they only care about position, or they only, they don't ever want to make waves. So, there's this huge bureaucratic inertia, and that has infected the military as well. Far too many senior military leaders are essentially bureaucrats that are primarily concerned about their own career and just try to ride out the political waves to do that. And that's why you've seen the disaster and the withdrawal from Afghanistan and other things that have occurred in our military. And we forget that. We love the military. I love the military. I loved serving. I loved everything about it. I want to support veterans. That's why I'm so passionate about what I do. But we are naive if we don't think that there are bureaucrats that are simply government functionaries that are just heavily embedded throughout the Pentagon. So there's a huge problem there. And I will say there are significant problems with the way we run military healthcare. During the Obama administration and then the Biden administration completed it, there was this whole idea of centralizing military healthcare under the Defense Health Agency. And the leadership there is frankly terrible. They're terrible when it comes to anything other than just sort of managing budgets and implementing one size fits all solutions. So it isn't surprise us at all that when your appeal is the Surgeon General of the military, that these accommodations are going to be denied, because of course these people are, revolving doors with pharmaceutical companies, things like that. So there's so much, everything we see that we get frustrated with our government over exists within the military system as well.
You were talking about how these military officials within the Pentagon, they are career bureaucrats. We can just see it because we see what's coming out of the Pentagon. But what's the fix to that? I mean, you can fire these people, but these people are still Americans. It's like they're the American, um, the bedrock of America has been rocked.
Mhm.
And this is where I think this is more of like a spiritual and an
Yes.
emotional issue than
Yes.
anything else. Would you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, for me as a Christian, I think we need revival, and I think that one of the biggest problems we have throughout all of our society is we see the chaos that comes from not recognizing basic foundational biblical principles, the things that our founders believed in when they founded this nation, and they were not perfect. No government system in a fallen world is ever going to be perfect. But over time, we have moved away from that and we've adopted ideas, whether it's, critical theory, communist ideas, all of those things, we've adopted them. They've infected it. And you have far too many bureaucrats within the federal government and the military system that think government is the solution to everything. And they think that they're the experts and they think that everyone else is foolish. And if we would all just listen to experts, listen to them, these government functionaries, the world would be a better place and they would solve problems. And that is really what's so challenging. So we, again, getting into strategic policy, our military is way, way too large when it comes to the administrative and bureaucratic functions. It should be a quarter of the size it is on active duty. We should have a huge guard and reserve force. That should be our force and concentration. It should not be as top heavy as it is. I was talking to someone well, Rob Green, about this the other day, but there are more admirals in the Navy. Just imagine this conceptually. There are more admirals in the Navy than there are serviceable ships that can be sailed by the Navy. There are more admirals than there are serviceable ships in the United States Navy today.
Whoa. I remember John Frankman was on the podcast talking about how in World War II, there were just a handful of generals. Now there are hundreds of generals.
That's right.
So yeah, it's too heavy up top.
Absolutely. And again, we sort of created self-licking ice cream cone when it comes to bureaucracy, and every other aspect of bureaucracy in the federal government has infected the military and the Department of Defense. So again, I mean, drastic cuts would be a great place to start. And you have to be wise about doing that, but drastic cuts are absolutely possible. Drastic cuts should happen. And there are positive things happening, but there needs to be a lot more to be done. And unfortunately, it takes time, and it's very challenging for a senior Department of Defense leader to figure out what challenges to take on, what battles to fight first, and what's going to have an impact.
Hmm. Do you think the military, in terms of skimming off the very thick layer of highly decorated service members up top, do you think that can happen within the next 4 years?
I think it could. I'm not confident that it will, but I think there are ways to do it. And there are some positive signs, but you have to look at restructuring things, and you have to look at standards. I mean, one simple way to start getting rid of bureaucratic excess in the military is enforce standards. We've seen very prominent senior military leaders who we all know could not pass a reasonable military physical fitness test. And so the answer is, doesn't matter what your rank is. If you can't pass a simple physical fitness test, if you don't meet standards, you don't wear the uniform anymore. It's time for you to retire. It's time for you to move on. You can go and get a civilian job or otherwise. But there are simple things related to accountability and standards that could be enforced across the board, actually meaningfully enforced, and you would see the fat get trimmed, if you will.
Literally.
Literally.
Okay. Yep. All right. So let's talk about reinstatement of the military. Service members who were kicked out. So Executive Order 14184 in February 2025 stated that the 8,600 military servicemen who were kicked out over the COVID shot mandates should be reinstated with back pay. Would you explain how this process has gone and any obstacles that these service members are facing?
Yeah, so for that group, which is a very kind of the smallest group of service members that were impacted by the COVID mandate, these are the individuals who were involuntarily separated through administrative processes because they did not receive these COVID medical products prior to the injunctions in federal court, which stopped this, right? So that's who this impacts. So it's a very small percentage of the people that were actually impacted by it. But what the president has done is directed that all of them will have a path to reinstatement. So far, the process for those individuals is they apply, and the promise is that they will be reinstated. They will go back. They will have the opportunity to get rank and promotion as if they had never left. That was the president's word, make them whole, and that they will even receive back pay for the time and service that they've lost. So that's the goal. So far, the implementation has been less than ideal in what we've seen so far as the orders that have come out. One of the concerns a lot of people have is, these are service members who were involuntarily separated. They were forced out. Many of them received a negative service characterization. So many of them didn't receive an honorable discharge. So they've dealt with that. And now they've had jobs. They've had other things that they've done in their life. And that back pay is going to be reduced based on earnings they've had and other things. So it's a great step. It's a great acknowledgement. I particularly appreciate language as an attorney that says unfair and unjust. And the president said that in the executive order, that it was unfair and that they were unjustly discharged. That's important. But so far, the reinstatement pipeline, the policies that are in place, the practical method to do this has failed to recognize that there was injustice.
Mhm. All right, so we have the 8,600 or so military service members kicked out because of their vaccination status. Then we have a second group of about 80,000 service members who resigned ahead of being fired, and they resigned because of the retaliatory measures. Would you speak to them and what they're going through right now?
Right. So this is a really unfortunate group, and I have many clients that fall into this group. So these are individuals who filed a good faith objection to this unlawful order, whether it was medical, religious, or otherwise. and they were saved by the federal injunctions. So the military didn't kick them out in time, right? Many they tried to rush and kick out. They didn't get them out in time, but then either because they were at their end of their service contract, the end of their service commitment, or otherwise, they did not continue in the service. For me, it took an injunction in federal court to get me to a retirement, but I would have continued to serve. I didn't have to retire when I did. So I left, quote unquote, voluntarily during this time frame. So this is a huge group of people. Many of them, clients I've represented, were denied the opportunity to continue to serve. For example, they were attempting to reenlist, and their reenlistment was denied by their commander. And some of them, their reenlistment was denied specifically because they had not received the COVID vaccine. So they didn't go through the administrative separation process, but they were administratively denied the opportunity to continue to serve. And one of these individuals was less than 4 years from retirement, right? So they had over 16 years of service in. There are many others who were given adverse paperwork. So they were given, some sort of a reprimand in their personnel file. So they weren't promoted, and they were passed over for promotion. Some of them passed over twice for promotion during COVID and during the previous administration, and then they're forced out. They're not being allowed to continue to serve. And then again, there are many others who just reached a point where they were afraid what was going to happen. They were afraid they were going to be court-martialed, put in jail. They were afraid of what was going to happen to their families if they continued to serve. So they got out as soon as they could. And again, these are the people. It's a huge group of people, much larger than the 8,600 we're talking about, that wanted to continue to serve, that would have continued to serve. They were forced out over this, and these are the same people that were quarantined. These are the same people that weren't allowed to go to church. These are the same people that were restricted to base. These were same people that were not allowed to leave the ship on deployments. These are the same people who were threatened to be court-martialed. They were called foolish. They were called ignorant. They were called stupid. They were called dangerous. They were called unpatriotic. And that's this huge group of people that fall into that second category.
Mm-hmm. So what measures are being made or given to bring them back? I mean, you mentioned that some people were trying to get back and they were denied because they're still not COVID vaccinated. When did that happen?
So that's happened sort of throughout this, because there are still many within the military that, regardless of the president's executive order, regardless of any guidance that comes out from the higher levels of the Pentagon, they still have very strong feelings. They have, hatred, discriminatory feelings towards those who stood up to the mandate. So they don't want them. So they'll say they're ineligible. They'll find some way to say, well, you're ineligible for that position. I had a client. This is a great example. I had a client who was specifically intentionally selected for a deployment that didn't even fit his background or skill set, just because they thought the country he was going to would force him to get the COVID vaccine. So he stayed in, he made it through the mandate, and then they intentionally selected him for a deployment not related to his career field, not related to his skill set, because they thought that nation in particular would still enforce the COVID vaccine mandate. So there's a lot of those things that are going on as we look at that group of people.
It is incredible to me how the military, especially higher ups, are so bent on retaliation. It has taken my breath away. Did they not have good training and a good character training when they were younger? They needed to have been homeschooled and have a mom that just whipped them into shape. Or maybe their mom allowed them to act that way.
I mean, one of the things that we have is, it's this weird balance in the military, because the military is always a microcosm of society as a whole. So we have very good people and very good leaders in the military, but we also have the other folks. And one of the things we've seen, it's a fascinating study. You need to read it. It was done by two professors at the Army War College. It was done in 2015, 2016 timeframe. And they looked at different things about military officers, particularly in the Army. And one of the things they concluded was that there was this incredible integrity crisis. And here's an example. Here's an example, and this does lead into COVID, is they were looking at the annual training requirements, right? Looking at the annual training requirements in the Army. And all they did is just lay out how many man hours it would take to accomplish all of the training that the Army requires every year. And they found it was impossible, that it was impossible for these troops to actually have gone through all the training. But yet, at one point, and I don't know if it was 2014 or 2013, as they were looking today for the study, every single officer at a certain level in a leadership position in the Army had checked off that 100% of their training was complete for 100% of their personnel, when it was actually physically impossible to complete the training in a year. And so what you see then is a larger question about military culture, where as you go up through the ranks and you reach a certain level of leadership and command, there is this expectation that you will have zero defects, you will pass every inspection with 100%, that you will comply with everything, and that you will never be, you will never not be at 100% compliance. And that's bureaucracy, right? That's bureaucracy at its best. And so even going into COVID, you had this issue with the potential for a real character and integrity crisis at some levels of military leadership. So then you go into COVID and you have this issue of, if military leaders look their troops in the eye and they acknowledge that they're being asked to enforce an unlawful order, they have a challenge that they had to face. They had a choice they had to make. They could either look at the law, look at the truth, look at the facts, and acknowledge that and say, I'm not going to enforce this order. I'm not going to kick my people out. I'm not going to punish them for this. Or they could say, well, some JAG in DC said it's fine, do it anyway. And I'm just going to take what they're saying at face value. I'm not going to look at anything else. And that's really sort of the crisis that happened. So of course, now there are some military leaders that are coming forward and say, yeah, we got this wrong. Let's make it right. But there are many others, and some I've looked in the eye and had conversations with, who said, well, we're in the military, so we just follow the order. And that's what I did. I followed the order. And that's the opposite of what we're taught in the American military. And again, I could go on a diatribe about that, but we're taught from the very beginning, especially as officers in the military, we do not follow or enforce unlawful orders. We don't do that. We don't even swear an oath of loyalty to a leader, to a president, or even a nation. We swear an oath of loyalty to the Constitution, and we are expected as military officers to take every order we receive and say, if this violates the law, the Constitution, then I am supposed to ask questions. I am supposed to raise my hand. I am supposed to challenge it. Just like I'm supposed to say, as an Army officer, I'm supposed to say, hey, boss, we can't possibly physically complete this training as required and check off 100% on this, so I'm not going to do it. And the answer, their fear was they would be fired if they did that, right? But we know throughout our history, as a nation, throughout military history, who have some of the brightest leaders been? They were the leaders that would actually had the integrity to speak up and speak the truth. I mean, look how reformational Billy Mitchell was for the United States Air Force. He was court-martialed, right? He was court-martialed because he was speaking the truth and demonstrating the ability to, sink Navy ships with air power. So that's just something we've lost. We have far too many military service members that see it as a career, that see it as a way to get a good pension, as opposed to actually serving. And then they're afraid, even some that have showed bravery in combat are afraid to stand up to the bureaucracy. And they're afraid now to acknowledge mistakes that were made during COVID.
Jordan Carr, a former military member and freedom advocate, we both know her, just posted to X a document that was sent to her by a former airman who left the military after months of retaliation due to his vax status. After reaching out to his recruiter to be reinstated, he was sent a document asking him to sign a statement that read, quote, "My decision to separate was made freely and without coercion." What? Are service members being asked to sign documents like this in order to be reinstated?
Yes. That document is a document that was sent out by the Air National Guard. It was emailed to military service members that left the National Guard because of the COVID mandate. And that is the first. I haven't seen any documentation from the other services yet or from the active duty Air Force, but the Air National Guard set out that document And there are many problems with it, but one of the biggest problems with it is I've already spoken to several of my Air National Guard clients who are not going to sign it because they would be lying. To say they left voluntarily would be a lie. And so even if they wanted to get back in and serve, it looks like malicious compliance. It looks like JAGS drafted that document in order to get people to say they left voluntarily, number one, and then number two, to essentially waive any legal right they might have in federal court or through the Board of Corrections of Military Records to get back pay, to get reinstatement, to have their records corrected, to get promoted. So this is a huge problem. This is a huge problem. And this is what the policy is going to look like for this huge number, tens of thousands, 80,000 plus people who were devastated by this mandate. If that's the resolution for them, I fear most are not going to sign it. I'm so far not advising any of my clients to sign a document like that because we're going to be still looking to pursue resolution through the Board of Corrections and through federal courts if necessary to try to make them whole. So this is it is not in keeping with reality. But again, you have this question of, is this actual DOD policy? I want to give senior leaders a benefit of the doubt. I think they're not just giving lip service to this stuff. Is it malicious compliance? Is it just a lack of awareness of how large this group of people is and how devastated they were? And at some point, that's going to stop being an excuse. At some point, you can't feign ignorance anymore about how devastating this was to these folks.
Right. So this is my question. Is this Pete Hegseth coming out with this? Like you mentioned, is this the Secretary of Defense saying this? Or is this somebody below him that's pushing this through so people waive their rights? I mean, it's what do you think? You've said malicious compliance.
I want to give Secretary Hegseth the benefit of the doubt on this. I want to take him at his word. I believe he does have character and integrity. And again, meeting with senior Department of Defense officials personally at the Pentagon, this does not seem consistent with what they looked me in the eye and said to me that they wanted to see. This looks like a document that was not approved outside of the Air National Guard and that was drafted by attorneys who knew exactly what they were doing in order to try to limit legal liability for the Department of Defense for their unlawful actions. And that's the problem. So time will tell. For now, I remain hopeful, maybe naive, but hopeful that this does not reflect the intent of the administration or senior Department of Defense leaders, that this was an error, that this will be rescinded and pulled back. And I pray that's what they do. That's what I'm going to be advocating very hard for them to do. And I've certainly let some senior defense officials know personally my concerns with this.
Right. I'm hopeful too. What makes me concerned is that this, like we were talking before we started the interview, this has been the biggest mass exodus from the military in history. I mean, tens of thousands of people leaving within like a 2-year period, 3-year period. I mean, so you can't, for Pete Hegseth not to be involved with every single part of this reinstatement process, he is doing himself a disservice and he's doing the military a disservice. He needs to, if this is his true heart, to make these people whole and to bolster the military with service members who are people of integrity, he needs to be heavily involved with this process. There's no higher topic, higher thing on his plate than this.
Well, and it gets worse than that. And one of the things I'm deeply concerned about is the ongoing negative impact it's going to have on retention.
Exactly.
So for example, I have 3 Navy SEAL clients, seasoned, experienced Navy SEAL clients with over 10 years of military service who were only saved because of what we did, the delays we were able to get, and then ultimately the injunctions that occurred in federal court. That's the only reason they continue to serve. They have now served out their time. There's 3 of them, my clients, whose service commitment is coming up, not their retirement. And they're close to retirement, and they're going to walk away without a retirement because they will not serve one more day in the United States military is Navy SEALs who've deployed, who've done incredible things, they will not serve one more day until there is at least some level of accountability for what happened during COVID. And some of these guys, some of these elites were treated the absolute worst of anyone. What my clients went through that were Navy SEALs on the East Coast was horrific. We had people that committed suicide because of the way they were treated by their chain of command during this. So that's one of my concerns as well. You have those that stayed in as a huge third category that, some will stay in and get to retirement. Some will do whatever they can to continue to serve, but many are there. And think about, again, everybody, Navy SEALs are on TV all the time. Navy SEALs are, the latest thing in Hollywood, but just think about the training, right? The training, the effort that goes into the creation of a Navy SEAL, and then what it means to lose 3 highly trained, experience in deployment, stellar Navy SEALs that are just going to walk away because of this. Even just 3. That's millions of dollars of training, the very best of the best that the United States military is losing because we haven't gotten this right yet. And there's still an opportunity to get it right, but that's just a microcosm. If I know of 3 just Navy SEAL clients, I certainly have many other clients that fall into that category, but we're talking about fighter pilots, Green Berets, Coast Guard rescue swimmers. We're talking about people that take years and years and years to replace when we already have shortages and a retention crisis in the military.
Yeah, you mentioned this third category of service members who are still in the military who were harmed but were able to stick it out and not leave. But you're saying that they're going to be leaving very soon, or they're very dissatisfied. How many do you believe are in that category?
It is so difficult to try and figure that out. The one number that I've been able to latch on to try to figure this out is that there was a senior Department of Defense official that put out a number and said that as of the deadline, Secretary Austin's deadline for everyone in the military to be vaccinated, that there was about 253,000 service members. So 250,000 service members were not compliant. In other words, the deadline came and went, and there was 253,000 plus that had not received any of the shots. So when we start to try to do the math, we look at the huge number of people that left, somewhere between 80 and 100,000 people that left. That means there could be another 100,000 people that stayed in some capacity over time that have been impacted by this. And I can give many examples, but the best example is, a client that's a military pilot, an Air Force pilot that it was serving during COVID. They were a stellar career, done everything right up until COVID. They didn't get it. They received a letter of reprimand. So they received a formal written reprimand for not getting the shot. And then they went to a promotion board and they were not promoted because they had a reprimand. And they also had a negative service report, right? They have a negative service evaluation. And then some of them, one client I can think of in particular in the Air Force, went through 2 promotion boards during COVID before all of this was resolved, and they were not promoted. So now they never will be promoted. So that they could be selectively continued and allowed to continue their service to get to 20 years, but they may not be. But regardless, these are individuals who were top performers who now cannot promote, missed out on command positions, were fired from leadership positions, didn't go to training, didn't deploy. And so their career has been devastated. And some of them, honestly, they just want to serve. They just want to do the best they can. They're going to recover. They're going to bounce back. But others, they still may not get to retirement. We're going to see a fallout of that over the next 5 to 10 years of people that aren't even able to get to that full retirement. They're never able to achieve what they would have in their career. And at best, my clients that stayed in, most of them are 2 to 3 years behind their peers when it comes to promotion, job opportunities, and advancement in the military. And again, we're talking about a category of people that were willing to say, I care more about my character and my integrity than I do about my career. And so these are the people that we need serving. These are the people that would stand up to tyranny and to unconstitutional acts if they were in the Pentagon. And those are the people that will continue to be purged. Again, if we don't look to first step is let's make the reinstatements rights. Let's get that piece right. But then we have to look holistically at what could be another 100,000 people still serving in the military whose careers were destroyed. And how do we make them whole? How do we get them back where they need to be? And, that's where I look at this and say, at some point, the president, Secretary Hegseth, someone at that senior level needs to be able to look at camera and say, this was unlawful. This was an unlawful order. What we did was wrong. It was unlawful, and we're going to do everything it takes to make it right. And I can tell you right now, all of the attorneys in the world that work in DC, all of the attorneys in the general counsel's office, all of these individuals are telling them not to do that because there's pending federal litigation. But ultimately, the courts are coming our way. And the Court of Federal Claims, in the first federal case that did it, has said this was an unlawful order because the Religious Freedom Accommodation Act was violated, and it was an unlawful order because it was an EUA product. This whole idea of interchangeability and all of that was not consistent with federal law. This was a violation of federal law to order military members to receive an EUA product, and there was no FDA-approved product available to military members after the mandate was issued. So and we proved that over and over again. So the reality is it's going to be found repeatedly unlawful in federal courts. There's a case in the Fifth Circuit, the Jackson case, where Secretary Hegseth will be named as the defendant. And so this Department of Defense at some point is going to have to make a decision to say, are we going to take a loss because of the illegal acts that President Biden and Secretary Austin did? Or are we going to step forward and do the right thing? So that's a huge part of this moving forward that we're going to have to look at. But again, there's this entrenched bureaucracy in DC that is pushing back against that, either just because they want to protect the legal interests of the Department of Defense, regardless if they're wrong, or because they don't want to acknowledge that what they did and the advice they gave was failed their leaders during COVID.
That's right. I hope the president and I hope the defense secretary do not listen to those lawyers ultimately. And I hope they do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And it can actually end this. That admitting it was unlawful, like you said, into the camera, it's different than on paper.
That's right.
Saying it into the camera and looking into the eyes of the service members who were purged, that will bolster the country and bolster national security. We would have an integrity back into our military if that were to be done. And it's actually, yes, there are ramifications, but it's actually really simple to do. It's just an admission.
That's right. That's right. And it would do a lot. And again, it feels great, and it has been good to have the president say, to have the Secretary of Defense say this was unfair and unjust, which is very helpful language. But to actually acknowledge, like a federal court has and other federal courts will, this was unlawful, to get out ahead of that and do this right and not be overly concerned about the ramifications. We can address those. Would do a lot. It would do a lot for good order and discipline. It would do a lot to restore integrity. And then this could be a success story. This could be training for future military officers to say, hey, even when there's a crisis, even when there's a so-called pandemic, we can still do the right thing and survive as a country. And the Constitution matters more than what some expert calls a crisis.
Yeah. And it's these people that you want as the higher ups in the military. It's not the ones that are there now.
That's
It's like it will be better for the country to bring in these 80,000 people again. Well, I have one more question before I ask my very last question. And that is about the court case that you mentioned, that the Trump administration will finally have an opportunity to admit wrongdoing. Wasn't this lawsuit just filed, or has this been around?
This has been around, and there are several. I mean, in some respects, it's hard to keep track of them all, but there's several cases. One case in particular, the Jackson case in the Fifth Circuit, is one where Secretary of Defense Hegseth will be named as the defendant. It's been remanded back down by the Circuit Court of Appeals for trial. And there's already been evidence put forth in that there was a conspiracy, that there's an admiral ready to testify that there were people in a room saying, no, we're just going to deny all of these. We're going to deny all of these accommodations. We're going to deny all of these exemptions. So there's certainly evidence out there. There's certainly whistleblowers that have come forward, and I hope more continue to come forward, that there were at the highest levels decisions made to simply ensure 100% compliance regardless of the law. And that really did create a constitutional crisis. The executive branch, the military, does not get to decide unilaterally that they're going to ignore Congress, they're going to ignore federal law and the Constitution. So, again, these cases do provide an opportunity for the Department of Defense through the Department of Justice to step forward and say, you know what, we're not going to defend this anymore. We're not going to contest these allegations anymore. We're going to take a position that's consistent with federal law. We're going to acknowledge what the Biden administration, what the previous administration did, that it was illegal, immoral, and unlawful. And we're going to move forward because that's the right thing to do, regardless of the consequences.
Seeing how the military has handled all of the COVID um, firings and handled all the retaliation, how have you changed your own life to reflect what you've learned?
Well, that's a great question. I think the biggest thing for me is I have realized that, we cannot make idols out of certain things. We can't make idols out of military service, and we have to be very careful about defining ourselves simply and getting our identity from, for example, military service rather than Christ and other things. So building strong communities, building strong families, being involved in a local church where you have a group of people around you to support each other when things are hard. Those are all things that I have learned. And ultimately, it just has renewed in me a desire to see people, as a Christian, to see people come to Christ, to do the right things, but just a call for our nation to return to some basic concepts and principles and recognize that there are principles, our founders recognized them, that are key to how we can have a free country. We've had the freest nation in the world throughout history. That's because I believe of the biblical beliefs of our founders. So we can get back to that. It's not impossible. We can do tremendous things, but that has changed a lot. And the other thing that's changed for me is I was naive to some extent in my military service, and at times in my career, I sort of believed in the system far too often, if you will, right? Oh, it's going to work out. The system is what it is. Well, I must, even during COVID, as an attorney, as a very experienced JAG, I'd sit around with other JAGs that were like-minded that I was talking to, and I'd be like, are we just dumb? Like, are we just reading the law wrong? Are we reading this wrong? And you feel that way. You feel foolish sometimes. And ultimately it wasn't. So I learned a lot, but I learned to have people around me that I can trust, that I can pray with. And I have learned that sometimes the right thing to do, doing the right thing, can put your whole career, your whole pension at risk, like it did for me and for my family. But that can be incredibly rewarding. And sometimes it's the only and the right thing to do. And you have to be prepared for that. So I guess what I would say for myself, my family, for my daughters, I've just said, be prepared for God to put you in a difficult place. Be prepared to pick up the phone and answer the call. And that's how this started for me publicly. I was fighting my own fight to fight the mandate, but I received a phone call from a friend, an attorney I'd met at a homeschool conference, and he called me late at night. This is a wild story. I met him once, talked to him, worked on one case with him. He called me. It was almost midnight on a Tuesday night. He called me and he left a message. He said, hey, I've got a group of 60 Navy SEALs that are being told if they don't get the mandate, if they don't get the shot tomorrow, they will be court-martialed. They'll be thrown in the brig and court-martialed. And he just said to me, he goes, you're the only guy I know that does this military stuff. Can we help them? And that was a Tuesday night. I called him on Wednesday. By Friday, I was meeting in the clandestine meeting at a church because they were afraid of being charged with mutiny with over 60 Navy SEALs. And by Monday night, we were public. I was on Fox News with Tucker Carlson asking for relief to let the American people know what was happening to these folks. So again, that was a phone call, and God had uniquely prepared me to be in a position to answer that call. So one of the things I've learned from this is where you're at in your own life, your spiritual life, your physical health, your financial health, so that when you are pushed, you're backed up against the wall, you can make a choice to do the right thing and to fight and be prepared to accept the consequences.
Well, that's an incredible story. This is the last question that I like to ask all of my guests. If the average American citizen could do one thing to combat the corruption that they see in the country, what would it be?
I would say they need to engage politics. They need to engage civics starting at the local level. They need to understand how low-level bureaucrats at the very lowest level in their state, in their county, in their city can have an impact. And we learned this during COVID. But just ask, each of you ask, in your county where you live, who is the elected district attorney? Who's the elected district attorney? Do you know? Did you vote? Did you campaign for them? Is it a Soros-funded prosecutor who does things like charge Michael Cassidy with a hate crime for doing the right thing? Is it a Soros-funded prosecutor that goes after the president of the United States? Is that who it is? Or is it someone who's actually a constitutionalist? So I would say look locally, because many, and I don't know what the statistics are, but just district attorneys races or sheriff's races are typically decided by a few hundred votes, maybe 1,000 votes. A small donation, a few doors knocked on, some flyers handed out, a conversation could have an impact on a local election. And that really is the American system. It's those lower civil magistrates that have the opportunity to push back against tyranny from the state capitol and from the federal government. So my biggest thing is get involved at the local level and actually try to have an impact on these small races. Because listen, if you think I'm crazy, all you have to do is recognize that when President Obama left the Oval Office, he partnered with George Soros and they spent billions of dollars investing in getting progressive district attorneys elected in conservative states throughout the country. Billions of dollars were spent. That's where Obama and George Soros focused. That's not a conspiracy. That's reality. The money is there. You can trace it. The reports are there. That's what they invested in. So if they saw that, the least we can do as freedom-loving Americans is take that same playbook and have an impact on these local elections, because ultimately it is through local government that we can take stands and push back against federal tyranny.
That's excellent. You're not the first person to say get involved at the local level. So thank you. Thank you for that answer. And thank you so much for the work that you're doing for the service members, especially the ones that are currently being kicked out over the flu shot. Thank you for your stance and your courage.
No, it's an honor to do what I do. And it was just so wonderful to speak with you.
Thanks so much for tuning in. Please like, comment, subscribe to, and share our podcasts. I'll see you next week.